A 10-year-old street girl shouted at a wealthy man, "You are my dad." My mom said. The wealthy man was shocked and couldn't believe it. When she showed him a photo of her mom, who was in the hospital, the wealthy man rushed there. What he saw upon arriving was absolute madness. Lila sat on the small, worn-out couch in their apartment, hugging her knees to her chest. Her mother, Amelia, lay in the bed across the room, her face pale and drawn. The faint beeping of the old clock on the wall and the soft hum of traffic outside were the only sounds in the otherwise quiet room. At just 10 years old, Lila had learned to take care of her mother in ways no child should have to. Amelia had been sick for months, her condition worsening day by day. The doctors had said it was a rare disease, one that caused short-term memory loss and severe physical weakness. Amelia couldn't remember where she'd put things, couldn't recall conversations from just a few minutes ago, and often struggled to get out of bed or make a simple meal. Lila did her best to support her, taking on more and more responsibilities around the house. She made breakfast for both of them, cleaned up, and even did the laundry. But their situation was growing worse. The rent was overdue, and Lila knew that if they couldn't pay, they would be thrown out. Their apartment, though small and run down, was their only home. "Mom, you need to eat," Lila said softly, trying to hide the worry in her voice as she approached the bed. Amelia blinked, her eyes unfocused. "What? Oh right. I'm sorry, sweetie," she murmured. "I just feel so tired." Lila smiled gently. "It's okay, Mom. Just eat a little. It'll help." But Amelia didn't move. She stared blankly at the ceiling, her thoughts drifting as usual. Lila sighed and sat beside her, brushing a strand of her mother's hair from her face. Amelia had been this way for weeks. Sometimes she'd forget what day it was. Sometimes she'd forget Lila's name. And sometimes she wouldn't even remember how long it had been since they last spoke. Lila had tried everything. She'd even researched online, searching for answers, but nothing seemed to help. She had no idea how to fix her mother, and she had no money to pay for medical care. They lived on scraps, piecing together what little they had. Lila couldn't even afford to go to a proper doctor. The truth weighed heavily on her chest. Her mother needed treatment, but it would cost more money than Lila could ever imagine having. A rare disease, the doctor had said, and the medications that could help were extremely expensive. Amelia couldn't even remember the name of the disease anymore. That afternoon, Lila decided she couldn't wait any longer. She couldn't lose her mother. She had to do something, anything. "I'll get help, Mom," she whispered to herself as she stood up. She grabbed the small, worn-out bag that had been her constant companion. It held the last of the coins she had managed to save. "I'll find a way." Lila knew the quickest way to get some money would be to sell something on the street. Candies. She remembered how her mom used to sell them when she was younger, but she had never thought she'd have to do it herself. The thought made her stomach churn, but there was no other choice. Outside, the sun was just beginning to dip behind the buildings. Lila pulled on a jacket and walked out the door, the sounds of the city bustling around her. She didn't have a plan. She just knew she had to try. She passed by the other apartments, the tired eyes of other people who lived in the same kind of rundown places she did. They all seemed to have the same dull look of hopelessness, as if they had given up long ago. But Lila hadn't given up. Not yet. She made her way to the corner store a few blocks down and bought a few packs of candy with the last of her money. She wasn't sure how long it would last, but she had to make it work. Her eyes scanned the street, and she began to walk from one busy intersection to another, stopping near traffic lights where cars slowed down. She held the small bag of candy out, her heart pounding in her chest. "Candies! Candies for sale!" she called out, her voice trembling. First, no one stopped. The cars just zoomed by, the drivers too preoccupied with their own lives to notice a 10-year-old girl standing on the corner, trying to sell candy. Lila felt the sting of humiliation, but she didn't give up. She walked from one car to the next, trying again and again. "Please, just a little help for my mom," Lila whispered to herself, barely audible. Finally, a woman in a white dress rolled down her window, tossing a few coins into Lila's hand without saying a word. Lila's heart raced. She had made her first sale, but it wasn't nearly enough. As the evening wore on, Lila's hope began to dwindle. She had sold a few more candies, but the money was still far from enough. She needed more. She needed to save her mom. Just as she was about to give up, a woman stumbled in front of her, almost falling to the ground. Lila caught her before she hit the pavement. "Are you okay?" Lila asked, concern in her voice. The woman blinked, clearly disoriented. I don't feel so good," she murmured, swaying slightly. Lila's eyes widened. "I'll help you." "Don't worry," she said, taking the woman's arm to steady her. I'll be fine," the woman said weakly, but she leaned against Lila for support. After a few moments, the woman straightened up, but her face was still pale. She gave Lila a grateful smile. "Thank you. I don't know what happened to me." Lila smiled back, relieved that the woman was okay. "No problem." The woman looked at Lila for a long moment, then said, "You're a sweet girl. I don't know what you're doing out here, but I can tell you've got a good heart." Lila hesitated, then replied, "I'm just trying to help my mom. She's sick, and I don't know what else to do." The woman's expression softened. "I can see that. You remind me of someone I know." She reached into her purse and pulled out a few bills, handing them to Lila. "Take this. It's not much, but it's all I can do." Lila's heart leaped. She had just made more money than she had all day. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of gratitude. The woman smiled, her face looking a little more relaxed. "You're very welcome. Take care of your mom." As the woman turned and walked away, Lila felt a glimmer of hope. She had made progress, and the night wasn't over yet. But little did she know, this would be the beginning of something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. Lila's hands trembled as she counted the money she had earned. It was barely enough to cover her mother's medication. She had hoped the extra bills from the woman who had collapsed would help, but it wasn't enough. She needed more, much more. As night fell, Lila walked back to the apartment, the candy bag in one hand and crumpled bills in the other. Inside, she found Amelia lying on the couch, pale and exhausted. She had napped earlier, but it hadn't helped. Each day, her condition worsened, and Lila felt the weight of it building in her chest. "Mom," Lila whispered, trying to hide the exhaustion in her voice. "I'm back." Amelia looked up, her eyes unfocused. "Oh, Lila, sweetie," she murmured. "How was your day?" "It was okay, Mom. I sold some candy," Lila said softly, not wanting to burden her mother. "I'll get you something to eat." Before Lila could leave, Amelia's voice stopped her. "Lila, honey," Amelia said slowly. "I need to tell you something important." Lila's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, Mom?" Amelia hesitated, brow furrowed. "I've been meaning to tell you for a long time. I just never had the strength." "Lila, your father." Lila blinked, confused. "My father? But I don't remember him." Amelia nodded, eyes distant. "His name is Ethan. Ethan is your father." Lila felt like the world had stopped. "Ethan?" she whispered. "You mean, he's my father?" Amelia sighed. "Yes, I was with him a long time ago, but we separated before you were born. I never told him about you. I thought it would be better that way. But now I think he needs to know. You need to meet him. You need his help. I can't do this alone." Lila's mind raced. She had never heard of Ethan, and the thought of meeting him, a man she didn't know, felt overwhelming. Would he help? How would she even find him? Lila nodded slowly, uncertainty clouding her heart. "I'll find him, Mom. Promise." Amelia smiled weakly, closing her eyes in exhaustion. "You're so strong, sweetheart." Lila sat for a moment, feeling the weight of her promise. She had to stay strong for Amelia. The next morning, Lila grabbed the photo of Ethan her mother had kept, a faded old picture. It was the only link to a life she never knew. Time was running out. Amelia needed the medicine, and Lila had no choice but to find Ethan and ask for his help. She headed to a luxury mall nearby, hoping to find him there. The mall was grand, filled with people in expensive clothes, while Lila felt completely out of place. She spotted a man leaving a store, sharp suit, expensive watch. Could this be Ethan? Lila approached him. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, voice shaky. The man turned, polite but indifferent. "Can I help you?" Lila stepped forward, holding out the photo. "Are you Ethan?" His expression changed instantly. "Who are you?" he asked, looking at the photo. "I'm your daughter," Lila said. "My mom, Amelia, said you were my father. She's very sick. We need your help." Ethan froze. "Amelia had a child?" "My child." Lila nodded, tears welling up. "Please, you have to help us. My mom needs medicine. She's very sick." Ethan took the photo, staring at it in disbelief. "How do I know this is true?" Lila's heart sank, but she stood firm. "I wouldn't lie. Please, you're the only one who can help." Before he could respond, a woman approached, glaring at Lila. "Ethan, what's going on?" Ethan turned to the woman, frustration in his eyes. "This is my daughter, apparently." The woman scoffed. "You think we'll just let some street child into our lives?" Ethan paused, looking at Lila. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. She couldn't stop now. Her mother's life depended on it. Lila stood frozen in the middle of the luxurious mall, clutching the photo of Ethan. Her heart pounded in her chest, and the cold air felt like it was pressing against her skin. Ethan stood nearby, his face a mixture of confusion and disbelief, while Jessica, his wife, stormed off in anger. Lila couldn't understand why the woman was so upset. All she wanted was help for her mother. Ethan's gaze lingered on Lila for a moment longer, and then he sighed, as if coming to a decision. I need to talk to my wife," he said, his voice strained. Lila's shoulders slumped in disappointment, but she didn't dare argue. Ethan had barely said anything, and now, with Jessica furious, she felt like she had lost her only chance. "I'll wait for you," Lila said quietly, her voice trembling. She wasn't sure what she expected him to do, whether he would believe her or just walk away. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gave her a long, uncertain look before turning away to follow Jessica. Lila stood alone in the crowded mall, the world around her moving while she stood still, paralyzed by the uncertainty of everything. A few hours passed before Lila saw Ethan again. He was walking toward her, his face tired and serious. Lila's heart skipped a beat, and she stepped forward, clutching the photo tightly in her hands. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice full of hope. "Please, can you help us?" Ethan stopped in front of her, his eyes scanning her face. He didn't speak for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, he sighed. "I've been talking to my wife and this is a lot to take in." Lila nodded. She knew it was hard for him to believe, but she couldn't give up. "I understand, but my mom is really sick. She needs medicine, and I don't know what to do." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his expression weary. "I know I want to help, but it's just, I'm not sure how all this happened. How could I not have known about you?" "I didn't know about you either," Lila said quietly, "but my mom told me you were my father, and I need you now. Please." Ethan's face softened for a moment, but then his eyes hardened. "I'm not sure I can just walk in and start fixing things. This isn't something I can just jump into. You have to understand, I've built my life and I'm not asking you to fix your life." Lila interrupted, her voice desperate. "I'm asking you to save my mom. Please. I don't know what else to do." There was a long pause. Ethan seemed to be wrestling with something in his mind. Lila stood quietly, her hands gripping the photo tightly as her heart raced. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice quieter now. "I can't make any promises, but I will help you find the right doctors. I'll try to get your mom the treatment she needs." Lila's breath caught in her throat. For the first time since her mother's illness had started, she felt a flicker of hope. "You will?" she asked, almost not believing it. "I'll do what I can," Ethan replied, his voice firm but uncertain. Lila nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The next few days were a blur. Ethan arranged for Amelia to be transferred to a private hospital where she could receive better care. The moment Lila saw her mother being wheeled into the hospital room, a sense of relief washed over her. Amelia wasn't out of the woods yet, but she was in good hands. Despite the emotional toll of the last few days, Lila kept pushing forward. She spent every moment at the hospital with her mother, hoping that the treatments would help. As for Ethan, he had kept his word. He had arranged for the medications Amelia needed and made sure she was receiving the best care available. But Lila could see that his own life was now tangled up in the mess her mother's illness had caused. He was trying, but it wasn't easy. Lila spent her days in the hospital, watching over Amelia as she rested. Ethan visited a few times, and each time, Lila noticed how difficult it was for him to be around. His wife, Jessica, had stopped coming to the hospital. Ethan's visits became shorter, and the tension between him and Lila grew. One evening, Lila sat by her mother's bed, holding her hand and trying to keep hope alive. As the days went on, Amelia's condition improved slightly, but there was still no clear sign of full recovery. Lila felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her once again. She didn't know what would happen next. Would her mother fully recover? Would Ethan really step up? And what would happen to their fragile family? But despite everything, Lila knew one thing for sure. She would keep fighting, no matter what. For her mother, for herself, and for the family that was slowly, but surely starting to come together again. Days passed at the hospital, and Amelia's condition remained unstable, though she was slowly showing signs of improvement. Lila stayed by her side every moment she could, holding her mother's hand and speaking softly to her, reassuring her despite the weight of the fear that still clung to her heart. Ethan had kept his promise, making sure the doctors had access to the rare medication Amelia needed. But the tension between him and Lila was palpable. Despite his efforts to help, Ethan hadn't yet fully stepped into the role of a father. There were moments when he seemed distant, unsure of his place in their lives. Lila could understand it. She had just met him, and everything had changed so quickly. But the days were slipping by, and Lila needed him to understand just how much his presence meant. One evening, as Lila was sitting beside her mother's bed, Ethan appeared at the door, looking weary but determined. He stepped into the room quietly, his eyes searching for Lila's. "How's she doing?" Ethan asked, his voice softer than it had been before. Lila looked up at him, her face tired but resolute. "She's holding on. The doctors say it'll take time, but I know she'll be okay. She's strong." Ethan nodded, his eyes flickering with emotion. He took a step closer, standing by the bed. "I'm glad she's getting better. I've been thinking about everything. About you, about Amelia. I never imagined this would happen." Lila watched him carefully, trying to gauge his sincerity. "I know it's a lot, but you can't just leave now. I need you to stay. We need you." For a moment, Ethan was silent, his gaze fixed on Amelia. Then, without looking at Lila, he spoke. "I wasn't ready for any of this, but I can't ignore it. I've made mistakes and I've been running from this for a long time. But I'm here now, and I'll help." Lila felt a surge of relief, though it was tempered by the uncertainty that still lingered. "You don't have to fix everything, Ethan. You just have to be here. For us. For Mom." Ethan nodded, and a faint smile tugged at his lips. "I will. I'll do what I can." Later that night, as Lila sat in the quiet of the hospital room, a call from the doctor broke the silence. The doctor informed her that Amelia's condition had improved enough for her to be moved to a less intensive ward. Lila's heart leaped with hope. It was a sign that her mother was on the path to recovery. The next few days were filled with visits from doctors, nurses, and specialists. Ethan stayed by their side, helping where he could, and gradually, Lila began to see a change in him. He started to spend more time with her, talking about the past, about his own mistakes, and about the family they were trying to rebuild. But it wasn't just Ethan who was changing. Jessica, though still wary, had begun to soften. She visited the hospital less frequently, but when she did, Lila could see the guarded look in her eyes was fading. Jessica was still unsure of what to make of everything, but the sincerity in Lila's actions, her courage, was slowly winning her over. It was on a quiet evening, just as the sun was setting, that Ethan sat beside Lila in the hospital room. He reached over and gently took her hand. Lila, he said, his voice steady, I don't know what the future holds. I can't promise that everything will be perfect. But I can promise that I'll be here. For you and your mom. Tears filled Lila's eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from relief. Relief that after all the uncertainty and struggle, they had finally found something stronger than the chaos. They had found a bond. A family, even if it was pieced together in ways they hadn't expected. As Amelia woke up, her eyes clear for the first time in weeks, Lila smiled, holding her hand tightly. Mom, you're going to be okay, she whispered. Amelia looked up at Lila and then at Ethan, who was standing by the door, watching them. For a brief moment, she seemed to process everything. Lila, Ethan. Their faces filled with concern and love. And in that moment, a quiet understanding passed between them all. I know, Lila, Amelia whispered back, her voice faint but steady. I know. Though the road ahead would still have its challenges, the strength of their family, the love, determination, and perseverance they had shown, was enough to start a new chapter. A chapter full of hope, healing, and redemption. And so, with the future uncertain but their hearts united, they began their journey together, stronger than before, ready to face whatever came next.